Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. So first of all, thanks for joining us today at the ZD Transform sessions. And you're currently just joining us for the session. We're going to cover about automating the edge with APIs. As we talk about the edge and we talk about the volume of devices that we see at the edge, obviously APIs and automation is key to be able to be successful and scale our business solutions appropriately. I'm joined today by a number of folks on this panel from BOPS, from IBM, and from Emerson, folks who have extensive experience with deploying large solutions at the edge, and also experience with the good and the bad that we all see with trying to make APIs core to actually deployment and scaling of our solutions. So APIs, really, they're the engine of automation. Every software solution nowadays requires them. They more and more, I think, are replacing what we used to do with UIs in the past. And the API, I think, is becoming the key user agent for folks as they deploy the solutions at the edge. I think they allow us to monetize data. They allow us to forge partnerships with both our partners and with our customers. And I think it's the way for innovation and growth, and I think cost reduction as well. So I'm looking to hear the comments and the feedback from folks on the panel. And let me start by doing an introduction of folks on the panel with me. So first of all, my name is Pádraig Stilblin. I'm the VP of Engineering and Operations for Zedita, responsible for the product development and support of the Zedita products in the field. So I'm joined by a number of folks. So first of all, let's Murali Ganluri, VP of Strategy and Product and Go-to-Market from IBM. Murali, do you want to give us a quick introduction, please?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Murali Ganluru, and Vice President of Product Strategy at the Software Networking and Edge business unit at IBM. Here at IBM, essentially, we believe that the edge is going to play a critical role in how we build out a distributed hybrid multi-cloud enterprise. And that's a key part of IBM's strategy, hybrid cloud and AI. So I'm really honored to be here along with my panelists. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So next, Neil Wang, Product Marketing Manager from Emerson. Neil, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Neil Wang, and I work with Emerson. I'm responsible for a newly built product called Delta V Edge. With Emerson product, we collect a lot of data from plant floor for manufacturing, for device maintenance, for manufacturing production planning purposes. And we reflected that data onto the edge so our users could use the data freely and make the data generate as many insights as they need to. I'm happy to be here.
Great, thanks for joining us. And then finally, but not least, Jamal Abdelkhalik, who's an IT software engineer from BOPS. Jamal, give us some background in your experience and BOPS, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So yeah, my name is Jamal Abdelkhalik. I'm an IoT software engineer for BOPS. I've been working on a brand new IoT solution for BOPS called BOPS Connect. We've been working on this since three years. So just quick introduction for BOPS. BOPS is one of the world's leading supplier of substrate, processing, printing, and converting equipment and services for the label, flexible packaging, folding carton, and corrugated board industries. So in other words, it's not lying to say that most of the packaging you find in your favorite supermarket have been produced by a customer of BOPS using BOPS machine. So of course, as my other panelists said, we are in the industrial world. We have manufacturing machines. So with the BOPS Connect solution, we try gathering the data and we try to give as much insight as possible to our customers. And of course, we're building extra feature on top of that. And yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks. So listen, Murali, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you actually, and we're going to pick up the topic, right? So what are the examples and best practices from IBM's perspective, right? Where do you see the value in APIs, particularly the edge and the hybrid solutions, right? Can you just talk a little bit about like why APIs and how they've helped drive your business, either drive growth or drive innovation or drive value?
Yeah, if I could take a step back, one of the things that we notice in the infrastructure space broadly, but in general across the board, is there's been a constant sort of a pendulum move between centralized solutions versus distributed solutions. And each time what you've seen is distributed keeps coming back, especially distributed computing, is because of the fundamental tenet of scale. When you talk about factories, retail storefronts, scale of decision making is a key element of that. So how do you deal with managing massive scale? You've got to drive a standards-based approach, and that's very important to IBM. An open standards-based approach. How do you push a declarative versus imperative model of managing those? And the best approach for that is clearly an API-driven model that we embed and use in all our products. It also helps us to easily integrate into existing systems. And so I would say that those are some of the fundamental tenets that IBM has kind of focused on, is around a standards-based approach and driving something that can be managed at scale. So to deal with all of those complexities, and there's a number of open source communities that Zedida and IBM are commonly part of. I would say that's sort of the fundamental tenet or the core piece of the puzzle. And this is across the board for us, across all of our software products. We built a product based on abstractions, APIs that can allow scale and the management of those.
Got it. Makes sense. A lot of sense. Yeah, I think particularly when you talk about IBM and the scale you guys deal with. Jamal, from Bob's perspective, what are the things that you guys look to accomplish when you're integrating APIs into your solutions?
So the thing is, we have APIs all over the place, and in short, we have, let's say, 3 layers. Then on our edge devices, for example, we have a layer which is EVOS, which is actually to communicate with you guys, with Zedida, to allow us to remotely manage our edge devices and so on. And if I jump from that, so we have the Zedida APIs that we use on our Bob's Connect solution. We have a microservice called device management that we give to our operation team, so they don't have to deal with Zedida. Basically, behind the scene, we're just calling Zedida APIs, and that's, you know, the main goal. Then on the cloud, we have multiple microservices, of course, how you can communicate. So between microservices, of course, you don't use APIs, but then all those microservices are APIs for the rest of our clients. We try to integrate with MES, MIS, ERPs, and using APIs is the key solution. You know, there is a way of having structured, documented interfaces, and it's particularly important also with our in-house edge modules that communicates with, as I said, you know, we have different product lines at Bobst, and you can think of a machine as a specific product. So every product line will have their own way of implementing their API if we let them. But as we do one centralized solution, which is Bob's Connect, we have to say, okay, guys, whatever you're doing, if you're printing or if you're cutting carton, I don't really care. I just want you to send me the data this way. And that's where it does the difference, you know. Behind the scene, a Bob's customer having a printing machine, or a Bob's customer having a machine that cuts, that folds, and that glues, will communicate the same way to us, and also he will use the application the same way, with some specificities, of course, but then it allows us to, as Morali said, we can also scale thanks to that. So yeah.
So that's a good idea. That's a good comment, because I think it's reducing standardization allows repeatability, and it does allow you to scale, right? And that's really important from the point of view of scale. So Neil, from an Emerson perspective, right, and the space that you work in, how do you and your customers see APIs being used in your space, and how do they bring value to your business?
So our if I refer to the Purdue model, from manufacturing to the enterprise to the cloud, we're a little bit lower on that spectrum. We're on the manufacturing floor. Well, our challenge is our system has been this. We're managing the entire manufacturing process. We are talking to the field devices, to the execution valves and the motors. We collect data from them, a huge amount of sensors over the plant, and we use the signals to run controls, but the signals could be used for other purposes such as reliability, such as safety, such as production planning. And that means we need to share the data, and eventually the data would be used um, by people that are not traditional plant operators, also people in the MES, in the ERP, in the supply chain across the department. But control system is a piece of critical infrastructure dealing directly with the manufacturing process. We have to separate the data provision from the running controls, and that's how we plug in our edge solution. Along this all the process, I'm thinking about the potential personas of the users. Some are just the plant operators, engineers. Some are people that sits on the enterprise environment who are really familiar with concepts like coding, APIs, etc. But we have to deal with the entire spectrum of personas. APIs we use enables us to move data around, to get data securely from the plant floor, transfer the data to the edge level, and serve the data to the end users wherever they are around the globe, as long as they're connected. But due to the skill set difference, some people are comfortably using API as it is, programmatically pulling data and querying API. Some users do not. They prefer a more fixed way, like hit a button type of approach. So APIs is heavily used by us as Emerson to move the data. But then when we present the data to our users, we frame the APIs differently. Sometimes just the direct endpoint exposed to the users. Sometimes we give them the analysis they need, the dashboard they need. So it's a full spectrum too.
Okay. No, it's really interesting, actually. I really appreciate the distinction you made around different personas have the abilities to consume the data in different ways, actually, and that's a really important. And, you know, coming from a high tech company, we always assume that people can just take the REST APIs and they should be able to go off and figure out how to make the magic, but that's not necessarily the case, right?
Not the case.
Put a layer on top of that and make it actually usable from a customer perspective. So, Paul, getting back to a topic, you mentioned this, and I'm curious to get your experience in this. Is, you know, dealing with APIs from different vendors, right? So, you know, we work with Bops today, and Bops is a great customer and a great example of how to use APIs to scale. But, you know, Zedita has an approach for API management. I'm sure all your other partners, customers do, right? How do you manage all the different approaches and all the different vendors' ways of presenting data to Bops in a way that doesn't drive your software engineers crazy?
So I am one of those software engineers going crazy sometimes. So of course, the first thing to set up is tests. So when we integrate with vendors like Zedita, we have a bunch of tests to test the APIs. Of course, earlier I mentioned the Eve layer. This layer, unfortunately, we can not really test as it's on the Zedita side, but the API we integrate from Zedita, those ones are tested. So we are sure when you guys are doing, so also, of course, we need versioning at API level. And of course, when you guys do some updates and so on, we have to make sure that it still match the definition we did and so on. We have three environment. So we are sure when it arrives in production, we will not have weird behavior with the vendor's API. The second point for me, it's to keep the vendors we integrate with small. So meaning Bops Connect can integrate with any vendors, but to get the data from, like getting data from Zedita, or we are using the Azure IoT Edge stack on our edge devices, those vendors, as we depend on them for our solution, we need to be careful and to limit the number of vendors, because indeed you can create easily an overhead of, as you said, making people crazy, software engineer crazy. If you have too much, you have to keep up with each updates. And also we need to be, I mentioned API versioning. This is really important. I mean, we cannot integrate normally with a vendor where there is no API versioning. Like with Microsoft, with the solution they have, we are normally, we are sure that if we set up something, as long as it's still, it's there, it will not change. It will keep working as it is. And of course, when they release new updates, new features, they have a new API version, and then you just have to update to that, and then you have to answer to the new interface, and then you're good. So yeah, there is different aspects. It all depends. But as I said, yeah, keeping the number of vendors small is a good thing. And then to be on the other side of the answer, to be like, we are providing APIs, as I said, for MES, ERPs, MIS, and also basic, any external API that our customers want to use. We try to make it should be the same everywhere. That's the goal. So make it repeatable, as we mentioned earlier. It should not be different. We don't want to do custom things for a specific customer. And yeah, that's how we manage to do things at scale. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Jamal. So Murali, I mean, I will say with IBM, right? I mean, you don't have the ability to keep the number of vendors that you interface with small, right? I mean, everyone wants to touch IBM, and IBM touches everyone, right? How do you manage such a vast ecosystem of APIs, different types of data, interfacing with different companies, big and small, right? Some with good process, some with probably immature process. It's got to be quite an undertaking for a company like IBM.
It is, and we have a very formalized process of how we onboard vendors, like we're working with Zedida, obviously. And so that process is very standardized. The other thing that protects us in this particular case, we have this edge. I mean, I know we're talking about it in general, but in the context of the edge, the product that that allows us to deploy and deliver workloads to the edge application, IBM Edge Application Manager, essentially is also built off of the open source version that we've kind of spent a lot of time making sure that existing ecosystem vendors go and test in that with that open source version initially, which is Open Horizon. And that was one example that actually worked very well with Zedida as well. So there is actually very little difference besides certain aspects that we obviously want to make enterprise grade. That's everything else is there in Open Horizon in this example. So we've kind of taken two-pronged approach. So to summarize, initially get our ecosystem to work with our open source version, which is Open Horizon. And then when we get to the formal partnerships and business ecosystem that we want to drive with customers as well, is we kind of get them through the process internally that we have. So it's sort of a two-tiered process.
Okay, got it. Makes sense. And then Neil, I mean,
if you don't mind, actually, sorry, one more point I wanted to add is there's also security around the API management as well, which is an important point. And I see by your smile that probably is the next question. So I'll wait for that.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask Neil about that because, again, one thing I've known, every industry, obviously, security is the first and last thing we talk about as a group when it comes to edge and deployment, right? But I know, Neil, in the manufacturing space, there's still a very, very keen sensitivity around securing data, and in some cases, there's a lot of air gap deployments. How do you deal with the security concerns around when you introduce APIs? How can you ensure that the data that's coming from the plant is going to the right people with the right levels of access when it comes to APIs?
For us, it's not only that. So data security in our industry is really, really critical. For example, we had past security disasters where hackers attack a manufacturing plant in some countries that normally ends up with explosions, pollutions, big political and economical disasters. So this is taken as, and our products controls refineries, oil and gas wells, and even power generation plants. So these kind of critical assets would likely become the attack surface for those kind of situations. We see our customers normally see security in the extreme. Air gaps are being used a lot. And if they use API, they have to contain the API, the number of ports API would consume, or even the data stream or the data volume to a very, very minimal level. And they would compromise nothing for security. So that's an extreme. In terms of converting to the APIs, if we want to pass the data flow, we have to leverage the same port as much as possible. And we use proxy servers to convert the port, to convert the message as the relay between layers and layers. So, and then we kind of switch gears by user credentials as well as authentications almost every step we do. So it's not necessarily the APIs itself, but we do hope that APIs would support the multiple layer security needs that we'll need to do.
Okay, that makes sense. So Moran, I'll come back to you because this is a really big topic, actually, security around APIs. Well, what's the IBM approach to ensuring the data secure and both the access and authorization is maintained when you use APIs?
And in this particular product, the Edge Application Manager, what we've done is we have, once we deliver a workload and then deploy it, we have a security agent that sits on the at the edge, and any communication via the API that's front-ended either by a dashboard or the API itself essentially has the security agent monitoring the transactions and any integrity related items with the workload container itself. So that's one element to it. The other thing I would also say is building the API to be highly reliable as well. So high availability of the APIs is going to be an important piece. That's something that we built into the architecture. Since the Bob's team and others have worked with other hyperscalers as well, it's a common thing to make sure that the APIs have been built to support SLAs and uptime requirements and so on as well, especially when you've got such a vast domain you're going to be managing at the edge.
No, it's huge. I mean, as I say, security is the most important thing that we can provide our customers with, actually, because without security, the services and apps unfortunately won't stand up. So Jamal, I'm actually going to go to a question on the Q&A. There was a question that came in about how API automation enables companies to manage the full lifecycle of IoT and edge devices, from provisioning, updates, decommissioning. How does Bob's think about that? How do you see APIs being core to that whole aspect, actually?
So in our case, it's a bit specific. So you mentioned provisioning and so on.
Yep.
In this case, as I mentioned earlier, we're using the Azure IoT stack. We are using ZDDA on the background as well. So we try to be as secure as possible and to do only what's needed for our edge device fleet to stay maintainable and to scale. So in our provisioning, we have a whole enrollment process where we leverage the IoT stack of Microsoft behind the scene. So the goal here is to say, okay, at Microsoft, you have a bunch of software engineers that worked on that since a few years. We don't want to reinvent the wheel for provisioning a device. There is some existing ways to do so, so we are using that. The only extra step we are adding here, it's the part with ZDDA, because as I said, we have I will quickly just say that, so we have, on top of our hardware, which is the edge device, we have the Eve OS, which is the OS we need for ZDDA. It's communicating with ZDDA securely. Then on top of that, we have the IoT Edge runtime, which is the Microsoft stack. It's a bunch of software they develop, so your device is secure. And also it allows us to basically remotely add some custom modules, and it's orchestration for modules. So if you see it that way now, that you have all the information, we do orchestration for virtual machine on top of our devices with ZDDA. But then on top of that, we do orchestration for specific modules thanks to the Azure stack.
Yep.
And honestly, it's pretty secure. We did several, we had several pen tests, several audits and so on. You know, we have the certification ISO 27001, and we thought a lot about that, and that's according to me and my experience, the best way to go, leveraging what is already in the market and leveraging one of the best in the market, which is Microsoft. So you have
Murali, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the question was about how API automation can enable. One of the experiences we've had is that that's a fundamental reason why a service layer orchestration software platform, whatever you call it, is important, because it takes the design of the infrastructure that you have to first set that in, drive the intent of what you want as an operator across this vast landscape, and be able to manage elements going down and what impact that has downstream on the workflow of the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. So API automation is extremely important for the full life cycle, not just of IoT and edge, but across the broad hybrid cloud infrastructure, not just from a provision, but the ongoing life cycle, things going down. How does that impact other elements? How do you bring them back on? So service orchestration is very important. We have a product called Cloud Pak for network automation that essentially sits adjunct with both Edge Application Manager and our other parts of our portfolio to enable this orchestration. And obviously Jamal's point exactly aligns with the same thing, which is that orchestration layer is the one that looks at how do you look at various elements coming up and going down at scale.
Yep. And I think that's key. I think also what I hear is that it's very much you've sourced the kind of the best solution for the particular problem, right? There's deployment of the actual OS, there's deployment of the app, there's the management of the app, and depending on which layer you're operating at, you may be using APIs from a different vendor, but it's all about applying, reusing what's the best tool out there, right, to meet your needs.
Yes.
So Neil, from your perspective, right? I mean, and Emerson, I mean, how do you see APIs as a strategy for growing business? How do you see it as a strategy to help with growth of the business and revenue in your space?
So it's sharing data and enable the data being used by all the users, by whoever wants to use it. Here, I'm not talking about the deployment of the edge device as infrastructure, but about the data that we provide. Again, the data we have collected from the manufacturing plant floor is pretty rich, all kinds of, not only just the process values, the alarm, the pressures, temperature flows, but also the events, who will log into the system, where there's an alarm, what is the timing. And people use the system for different manufacturing purposes, and there are characteristics tied to each of the process, like the batch manufacturing for pharmaceutical companies. So a full spectrum of data and data capabilities, all kinds of. An API would be able to provide with our users. So traditionally, each type of the data, users need to spin up a different pipe to access that kind of data only. Through the API, we were able to expose all the data through one endpoint, the same interface. And we are also able to expose the correlations between multiple types of data. That would enable the consumption of the data. That would make the advanced analytics used to be impossible to do through API. Those kind of work that users always want that they couldn't will make that super easier. So that would not only leads to the easy part on our direct end users, but it also nurtures a collaborators community that they could build the things that our end users may need, but then through their add value, they can save the hassle of our end users from developing the models or the analytical work by themselves. So this will not only, I would say, providing an API to access our data, not only ease the consumption, direct consumption part, but also fosters a collaboration community.
Got it. Makes sense. And Jamal, from a Bob's perspective, then, how do you use APIs to drive business and services in your space? I mean, is this something that does help with driving revenue, driving business growth, or is it just purely a technical and monitoring APIs type of solution you're looking at?
So, as I said, this IoT solution we've built is brand new. It has 3 years. So it's in production since July 2022. And so, yeah, I explained the technical point of view, but for the users, they are mainly, so, APIs, as Murali said at the beginning, is to send data from one point to another. And I mentioned it bit by bit, but the chain is pretty long, It's from a shop floor on a machine, going to an edge device, then going to the cloud, and from the cloud doing some processing, getting some, cleaning the data, getting the data of quality, and then giving some insight to the users. Okay. So quickly, just to give you an overview, but thanks to this data, we can give different features. So quickly, we have the first feature, the main feature, which is performance management, which provides different insight about a customer specific equipment, alongside with OE. I don't know, people know about that. It's overall equipment effectiveness, really important in the manufacturing field. Then we have a really nice feature, and that's where, using APIs and having these processes automated, being able to gather the data automatically does the difference. So this feature is equipment monitoring, and it allows our customers to be close to their machines without being present. So, in a basic manufacturing plant, a shop floor, you have the operator, which has an HMI, and can see what's happening on the machine. And we are providing this feature to any one of any customer from anywhere in the world. And, it's a bit let's say the migration from the old way of doing industry to the industry 4.0, it's a bit like cars. Like at the time it was only mechanic, then it went to having some electricity, and now it's fully digital. And it's the same way in the industrial factories. So, yeah.
That makes sense. And its APIs allow you to do all that, right? It's a gathering of the data securely and bringing it back to maybe a central location or a central cloud that allows you the value. I mean, Murali, from an IBM perspective, right? I mean, where do you see the main business drivers, based off APIs coming from edge devices? Is it like leveraging analytics? Is it leveraging machine learning? Is it improving operational efficiency? Or how do you guys think about that?
I think in short, it is basically about operationalizing at scale. That's where APIs come, especially at the edge, where you're talking about tens of thousands of nodes. And the second thing, of course, in which there are different elements, including the analytics piece that you brought up, but it kind of touches also into another part, probably that may be interesting, is how how the organization itself, the enterprise itself is organized. And one of the things is there are different stakeholders who will be accessing different elements of the product. So that's also another angle where APIs become very important. That's one thing that we've seen a lot with our edge customers, the different personas that interact with the system. And so how do you manage those interactions also then at scale? So the structure of the organization, the enterprise where this is being deployed or with whom it's being deployed also matters. That's another area where we see from a business point of view.
I will just jump on what Morali said. He used the word I like, it's interactions. And that's what I wanted to mention, is something that, it's the kind of things we can add easily thanks to APIs. It's interaction. So in my case, in Bob's case, it's interaction with the machine. So we are currently building new features. We already have some features where you're actually interacting with the machine remotely. Like we have a feature called AccuCheck where you can remotely, so I don't know, you're in the US, you have a machine here in Switzerland, and you can just send a little PDF that has some specificities to say, okay, if you're printing I don't know, the Zidida logo you have behind you, if there is, you can provide the specificity that you want. So the border should be with that percentage and so on. We can send that from the US to your machine in Switzerland. So your machine will do some checks with everything you're printing to say if it's good or not. And that's new kind of interaction we couldn't have in the past. On the past, you had to take the paper and then check it manually. And automating thanks to APIs, it's changing the world in all the sectors, basically. I just wanted to jump on this.
If I interpret that correct, no, it's a great example, because really what you're saying is APIs allow you to do things. One, it reduces the cost of bringing benefits to your customers, and two, it speeds up the changes, right? As opposed to, this is something that could have taken days or weeks to go through a process of approval, and then you go to execute it. With APIs, you can literally do this in a matter of minutes and seconds, right? And it just drives the whole efficiency of the organization, of the whole space.
Exactly. And as I mentioned, we have many product lines. And what is really cool, so before, every product line has had to do its own software because every machine is different, sorry. But thanks to our solution, because we're building some strong standard on how API should communicate, and we're acting as the central business intelligence, then every Bob's machine looks like it's the same, thanks to APIs again,
So actually, I'm going to ask you a question about that. I know we're coming to the end here. I'm going to throw out a question. I'm curious to get this panel's feedback. You mentioned about, I heard the theme of standardization a few times around making APIs and machines look the same. So when we think about scaling the edge, right, what we're doing is we're building on top of what's happened within the cloud, right, over the last 10 years, where we're using the technologies, using APIs, and to some degree, I guess we'll look at using Kubernetes and other types of application work management loads. Is it important for us at the edge to create APIs and create processes that are extensions of the cloud so that it's easier for people to move stuff from the cloud, and almost make edge like a background utility as opposed to people being specifically aware that it's an edge device? Or should we be building stuff specific for the edge? It's so different from the cloud that it must be treated differently as part of the scaling and growth of APIs.
Who's that for?
Please, Morali. Yeah. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Yeah.
It's a very pertinent question. I think there's this notion of cloud out and edge in architectures. And, I'm old enough, I guess, now to realize that it's never about one way only taking over. But what we're seeing increasingly is that cloud architectures are permeating across the edge. You gave the example of Kubernetes. I mean, clearly, as being from IBM Red Hat, Kubernetes or containerized distributions doesn't have to be Kubernetes driven. It could also be Docker or Podman. Individual instances as well are going to be an important segment. But fundamentally, the architecture has to be able to scale across multitude of heterogeneous environments. So it could be edge in, it could be, and it's more likely going forward that the application developers themselves are going to say that I want to develop it once.
Yep.
I have a standardized CI/CD pipeline and tooling that has been designed for cloud. So I would like this to be the case even for edge deployments. That is going to be a common factor that drives everything else. But I can't say that it's always going to be 100% one direction or the other. So it's going to be exception cases. And that's why you're seeing some articles, some thought leadership articles coming around edge native, which sort of is the hybrid between cloud native and the edge subject specific, area specific things that need to be considered.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. This is actually this particular is a really interesting topic for me, because I think it's going to drive the technology, right? And what we actually create and innovate on over the next 3 to 5 years in the edge. So unfortunately, I've come to the end, right? And I didn't realize just now we've come to the end of the session. So I wanted to say thanks to all of you, Murali, Neil, and Jamal, for joining us. I really appreciate you spending the time, and more importantly, sharing your expertise and your experience with our audience. So again, I just want to say thanks to all of you, and it's really been a pleasure having you on the panel this morning. So thanks very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And, have a great.
Yeah. That was great. Thank you very much, guys. And again, I hope to meet you in person over the next few weeks and months as we all move this edge and use APIs to make the edge scale and grow over the next few years. So as a note, basically, thanks to everyone. Now we're going to take a break for a few minutes. The next session starts at 11:30 Pacific time, where Kelsey Hightower, a distinguished engineer at Google Cloud, will be delivering our midday keynote. And so by all means, I would encourage people to dial into that, log into that. He's a really impressive individual, has a lot of great insights to bring from his experience with Google and how it's going to apply to the edge. So again, thanks to my panel, and thanks to everyone else for joining us. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.